Lisa, how are you?
Good, Ray.
So, you're working on some major planning projects for the city right now. But before we get into that, I think it's important to kind of have a little bit of your background, how you ended up with our wonderful city of Salinas and what you do for the city.
Great. Well, I've been with the City of Salinas for 18 months. My position is a senior planner in the Community Development Department. I head up the Plan and Project Implementation Division, which focuses on implementing the city's plan and projects that have been developed through other divisions and community efforts.
Right. So, do you like working for the city?
There's never a dull moment, that's for sure. Definitely there is so much going on right now in terms of planning and community-driven efforts. It's a very exciting time.
Right. So, you are working on some very important planning efforts for the city that's bound to change the character and the direction of many of our communities. Those include, as I understand it, the economic development element, the downtown vibrancy plan, now the LSL vibrancy plan. I don't think you're involved, but you're separate, but working on it indirectly. I think the Chinatown revitalization plan as well. So there's a number of other efforts that are going on simultaneously, and I know that we've had the director of library and community services interview and how the master planning for parks is going on at the same time. So many major efforts to make the city a better place to live, work, and play. So maybe you can describe some of those plans that you're heading up or the lead person in and give us a little more status. So let's start with the economic development element.
And that is a good place to start because that is really the umbrella for all the other community planning efforts that are going on at this time. For those of the audience that may not know what an element is, the city, by state law, is required to have a general plan, which is our guiding vision for the community. And there are seven mandated chapters or topic areas that we're required to cover, such as land use, conservation, open space, noise, safety, circulation, water quality. And so those are the mandatory elements, but a city can choose to identify other issues that are important to its community and its vision. And so it was 2012 that the city decided that it really wanted to elevate economic development to the policy level to guide future decision making as well as investment of resources. And our current general plan only has one goal and 8 policies regarding economic development. And so a decision was made to really have a more robust strategy. And through that process, the city developed in partnership with the community and community stakeholders a vision that is a long-term vision for the city that focuses on jobs, safety, and health.
Interesting.
Yes, and so the economic development element itself just doesn't focus on bringing jobs to Salinas or training individuals to fill those positions, but it looks well beyond that at what creates a healthy, prosperous community on many levels. And through that process, several goals and policies were identified in different categories. For example, quality of life identified the need for a parks master plan and improved community facilities. Thus, we are working on a parks master plan update as well as the expansion renovation of El Gavilan Library. The master plan also called for looking at revitalization of different community areas or economic opportunity areas. And the Alisal Marketplace, as well as East Salinas, the Alisal corridor, was identified as an area rich in cultural history, having lots of assets, and developing a community plan for that area as well.
Mhm.
At the same time, the economic development element was being prepared, a plan for downtown was being undertaken. And
Yeah,
so
could
that
you-
was then rolled into the economic development element too.
Yeah, so can you be a little more specific about the
Yeah.
downtown plan? It's been completed, but almost completed, right?
Right. So the Downtown Vibrancy Plan was accepted as a strategic planning document by the City Council in December 2015.
Okay.
And it originated with a group of stakeholders coming together with similar concerns regarding parking and circulation in the downtown. And as that conversation evolved, they realized that they wanted something more for the downtown, and for the downtown truly to be vibrant and to be a destination, they needed to look at other components, such as how do we bring housing into our downtown to create more of a round-the-clock environment? How do we create a destination that has public spaces for people to come and for events to occur? You know, how do we improve perceptions of safety in our downtown? And so the vibrancy plan identified those topic areas and was very strategic in making specific recommendations, action items for how the plan could be implemented and improvements made.
So a couple of the action
Mhm.
items deal with parking and traffic, right?
Correct.
So are there some things actually being accomplished with parking in terms of you're going from the planning process to the implementation or execution now of certain actions that are recommended in the plan?
Yes, our Public Works Department is taking the lead
Okay.
on the parking initiative and the directives that came out of the vibrancy plan. And the overriding recommendation was the need to look at the creation of a parking management district, to create a structure, an organizational entity that would be responsible for the operations management and capital improvements, the management of assets associated with parking. The first step has been enforcement,
Okay.
bringing enforcement under Public Works, and they've actually hired a private contractor last November to implement parking enforcement with consistency, primarily in the downtown areas, but throughout the city. And now they're taking a look at, okay, well, what are our current parking assets and how can they be pulled together and structured in a way that they can be effectively managed, as well as how do we generate the resources, identify the funding sources to create future assets, additional parking structures, and those type of improvements
Right.
related to
There's
parking.
some specific recommendations that came out, I think, of an additional study on housing that may be recommending some specifics in terms of production of housing units downtown, specifically market rate housing.
Yes. So one of the recommendations to bring vibrancy to the downtown was to incentivize to bring market rate housing into the downtown. There's a lot of affordable housing developments surrounding the downtown area, but to bring balance to and diversity to our housing stock, the recommendation was to take a look at market rate housing. So we initiated a study, had a consultant do a market analysis, one looking at demand. Is there demand for market rate housing? And the answer was yes. There is a demand for approximately 100 units a year for the next 5 years. A total of 500 units is what they're projecting. Then they
Great.
looked at, okay, well, who would be interested? Who would occupy these units? And they said, well, the target segments would be young professionals or what they call empty nesters, those older retirees who are maybe looking for a smaller place to live that is more convenient in terms of amenities. Third, they looked at, well, what are the product types? What type of housing would they like to live in? And so they had identified 3 product types, attached townhomes, stacked flats, and then multifamily apartments. And so they went through that whole scenario as to potential opportunity sites where these developments could be located on city parking lots. The whole premise, I should back up,
Yeah.
with the vibrancy plan was the conversion of city-owned surface parking lots into development opportunity sites.
So,
So
a
they-
higher best use.
A higher and better use. So that was the whole premise of the
Right.
vibrancy plan, was infill development, intensification of use. So then they also took a look at, well, if there's this demand, why hasn't development happened to date? What are the barriers
Right.
that are preventing this from occurring? And so they came up with a list of environmental barriers as well as policy and regulation barriers. And so we're taking the first step to implement their recommendations, take a look at some of our policies related to density, unit mix, and requirements regarding parking and open space that would make it cost prohibitive for a development to go forward.
You have a new planning effort essentially in the east side of Salinas, we call the Alisal, right? So tell us more about that, where we are in sort of the progression of that plan, and what preparations have we made to start that plan or implement or do the planning for the Alisal area.
So the origin of the Alisal Vibrancy Plan actually came about through the Economic Development Element Community Engagement process. So at that time, the city really took a different approach in engaging the community and held several workshops throughout the city, engaging the community in conversation as to the vision and future of our community. And one of the recommendations, suggestions that came out of those community meetings was the advocacy of community stakeholders in East Salinas to have a vibrancy plan for themselves. They saw the efforts that were underway in the downtown, and they desired that same planning and investment in the east side.
Wow. So there'll be probably more people involved in terms of the vibrancy plan than
Correct.
maybe compared to downtown, because the population and geographic area is much bigger. So what you're saying basically is the community is really going to drive the process for planning.
Correct. The Alisal Vibrancy Plan is really being developed under a different approach than the city has ever undertaken before. And I'd like to tie it to the city's commitment and efforts towards governing for racial equity
Right.
and building the capacity of residents to become leaders in their community and to advocate for themselves through city processes. And
Right.
so the Vibrancy Plan is to be a community-driven process that is very action-based and implemented in partnership with the community. So it is a new endeavor, so we're venturing into uncharted territory, but we have started by linking with community stakeholders and partners. So working with, we formed a technical advisory committee
Okay.
last fall that's comprised of representatives from county departments, school districts, nonprofit community-based organizations, religious groups, and we pulled them together to help us really establish the principles and values for our community engagement process, as well as outlining a structure. So we formed a 28-person
Wow.
resident-only
Great.
steering committee that will be guiding the planning process.
That's unique.
It's very unique, very unique. And what's exciting is we had 60 applications that we received from interested parties, and those that were not selected to be on the steering committee are encouraged to then participate on working groups. So how we're envisioning the structure is the steering committee guides the process and ensures that we're staying true to our community engagement goals and principles. And the working groups will take on specific topic areas
Okay.
and will be driving the content of the plan that is then vetted through the steering committee.
How long do you think, Lisa, the planning process will take for the vibrancy plan for LSL?
So in total, we're probably looking at 2 years, but we're
Okay.
already well into that 2-year process. So
Right.
last July, we actually identified a master consultant to help us with the actual technical writing of the plan.
Okay.
And that was even a unique process in itself, selecting the consultant, in that we held the final interviews and selection process as a community meeting in which community members cast a written ballot as to their preference, as to which consultant team they wanted to work with.
Wow.
And since then, we've been laying the groundwork in terms of approach, of community engagement. And next week, actually, we'll be holding a community meeting to recruit members for working groups. So once those pieces are in place, it will probably be about a year-long process
Right.
of planning and community outreach in preparing the plan that would then be considered by the decision makers late 2018.
Yeah. So we might have somewhat of a, not a final draft, but a draft sometime late.
Probably late spring, summer.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Definitely.
So it sounds like the community's really been receptive to this major planning effort. You've got, people that are interested, that are residents, that actually will be guiding the planning process and participating actively in the
Yes,
process. So
it's very exciting.
yes.
Residents
Yeah.
are really embracing
Right.
the opportunity to become involved, and that's the beauty of this planning process, is not everyone has to be involved at that leadership level
Right.
where they're on the steering committee, but there's a role and a place for everyone to participate, whether it be coming to a community workshop one time to share their input, responding to a community survey, being part of a focus group, or on a working group.
Right. So in terms of the community engagement, much of this will probably be bilingual in its approach, or have that
Yes.
ability and capacity?
So our steering committee meetings have been held predominantly in Spanish
Oh, great.
with English translation. And
As
again,
opposed to the other way around.
as opposed to the other way
This
around.
is different.
This is different. But we are feeling our way through in terms of the needs of the group. The whole premise behind community engagement, one of our guiding principles, is overcoming barriers, whether that be language barrier, accessibility to a meeting location, need for childcare, timing of day, the provision of food if they're coming straight from work. So we have, at this point, working with a small steering committee, been able to just have bilingual meetings. As we branch to larger community workshops, we have invested in the equipment, translation equipment, and we'll be providing those services. As to whether or not, again, the meeting will be in Spanish, translated to English, we're going to look at what the needs of the group are.
That's fantastic. Now, also unique, I understand we have some volunteers, Vista,
Yes.
that are students that are involved in this
Yes.
process?
So last November, the city, Community Development Department, as well as Library and Community Services, we partnered to submit a concept paper to AmeriCorps Vista, which is a volunteer program. I like to equate it to a domestic Peace Corps.
Okay.
It's
Right. Okay. That's a good way.
and the whole premise is a community capacity building.
Mhm.
So we were successful in getting 5 members assigned to us to focus on the LSL vibrancy planning efforts in different topic areas. So we have housing, small business support, health, education, and literacy. So they are going to work alongside us in supporting our community engagement efforts, but also building capacity, community capacity, and assisting with implementing any low-hanging fruit projects that we identify along the way
Right.
in support of the vibrancy plan.
That's wonderful. So, in terms of just staff time, you're the you are the lead in many ways. So, but there are other staff involved from your department,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then other departments are also involved.
Yes.
You mentioned Public Works,
Yes.
and so I'm thinking you mentioned Library Community Services,
Yes.
and to some extent probably police will be
Yes.
in part of that. So it's really a multi-departmental approach with you
Definitely.
and the Community Development Department taking the lead. So it's many different staff, right, playing different roles in that process.
That is correct. There's a lot of cross-departmental collaboration and coordination that's occurring, and you know, I think it's very unique,
Yeah.
as well as very effective. And it's why we're able this cross collaboration and this partnership and this communication, so we're all in sync and focus on the same strategies,
Right.
is very effective in
Wow.
accomplishing our goals.
That's great.
We will have our first kind of visioning workshop for the community at large will be at the end of October.
Okay.
And then we will have probably 4 larger community workshops throughout the planning process. One at the end of January, focusing predominantly on the Alisal corridor
Okay.
and having the transportation mobility focus.
Wow. Well, that's a major effort. So let's kind of go back to the beginning where
Yes.
it all started, supposedly, the economic development element. And maybe you can give us a little more detail about where that stands. It seems rather unique for a city to undertake an economic development element as robust to help guide its general land use plan.
Yes, not every city has an economic development element. And again, the city was very intentional when it came together with community partners in developing this element. They were looking at this element to, again, raise economic development to a policy level, but it was also to drive the future general plan update. There was that vision, the decision that economic development really is, and that prosperity was an overriding concern and desire for the community. And so we wanted to complete this element to then set the vision, the tone that would guide the future general plan update, which we're looking at commencing mid-2018.
Right. So the EDE, economic development element, would probably be ready for the council final decision sometime when?
So we are going to, in order for it to be adopted as an element,
Right.
We're required to undertake environmental review.
Right.
And so we are preparing an environmental impact report, or EIR, as required by state law. And as part of that process, we have to allow time for public review and comment of that document. The environmental report is really an informational document. It's to provide information to the decision makers in terms of potential impacts of a proposed project. In this case, the project is the adoption of policies and programs in the economic development element. And so we will be releasing that document early September
Okay.
for public comment, review and comment, and it will be a 45-day review period
All right.
from the date that it is released. So we will ultimately be coming to the City Council at the end of December for a final decision
Right.
in terms of adopting the element into our general plan, but it is a multi-step process in
Okay.
terms of where the community can participate in public hearings. There are going to be a series of study sessions at the Planning Commission and City Council leading up
Right.
to the consideration of adoption. as well as the comment period itself.
Wow. So you have many, as we started the interview, many planning efforts sort of in the fire. And you mentioned several, like the master plan for parks and community facilities, the Chinatown plan, then the general plan coming up next year. So how do you keep this all straight? How do you and our key leaders on staff, how are you able to juggle all those demands and all the community input and work with it all to make it have some sense about it, some rationale in terms of how to approach it, how to organize it so it can be effective, and it's not just a lot of busy meetings?
Right. So recognizing that there were all these planning efforts going on and the importance of coordinating those efforts, the Community Development Department created an umbrella called Vision Salinas. And Vision Salinas is a way to bring all of these planning efforts together and capture all the goals, objectives, visioning that is occurring under these individual efforts into what will lay the groundwork for the general plan update. So we're saying, okay, well, what is the vision for Salinas that's being identified in the Alisal Vibrancy Plan, in Chinatown, in the Parks Master Plan, and making sure that there is coordination of efforts, that there aren't meetings occurring on the same night, and where we can collaborate in terms of doing pop-up events or sharing information that we're doing so. So a website has actually been developed and is being launched called Vision Salinas. And that is kind of the platform, the launching pad, where the community can then learn about all the different planning efforts and be kept up to date on the calendar of events and documents that are being created, how they can become involved.
Right. So you have a lot on your plate, Lisa.
Yes, there is a lot. Luckily, I'm not, another division, Advanced Planning, is coordinating Vision Salinas, and they will be leading the general plan update.
Right.
But it does help to have that umbrella guiding.
Sounds like a really exciting time for the city to not only do the planning, but anticipate some actionable items that come out of it with recommendations that would be very specific to making improvements in the overall economic prosperity of the city. So I'm very glad to hear that.
Yes, for sure.
And the staff and yourself have to be kind of excited that all this is going on. And it sounds like all of it so far has been very well received by the community of Salinas.
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely. It has been an exciting time.
Well, thank you for being on our show today. We really appreciate some of this information, sort of demystifying the planning process and what actually is taking place. There are many steps and many people to talk to.
Definitely. Thank you, Ray, for having me.
Thank you, Lisa.